theme today is nature, beauty, and spirit. And I wanted to start by telling you two things about my personal background that relate to this theme. First is that I have been a lover of nature ever since my childhood. And that's because of the kind of family that I had. They we were living they are from Slovakia. My background is in Slovakia, and they just spent so much time in the outdoors and hiking and just spending the evenings and singing songs for hours and hours after the dinner was over outside by a fire. It was just a natural part of life. They also had a garden that they loved and took care of. And so I sort of started with nature being a natural part of living. The other is that I started doing photography when I was still in high school, and I've done it ever since. And I've gone through improving equipment and increasing skills and so on. And I have found that what digital photography allows me to do these days, allows anyone to do, is absolutely amazing. And it enables pictures to be made that would have been extremely difficult, if at all possible, in the era of film, positive as film also is. Especially during the 2 decades since my retirement from the University of Washington in 2002, these two aspects of my life have really come together in a wonderfully rewarding way. I've been spending more and more time in nature and not even noticing as it goes by. I go out every day, and it has become my most regular spiritual practice. I've been referring to my time of connecting with nature in a visual way as going for darshan. And the photographs that I come home with as my prasad. And they really, truly do feel like prasad. No, I have absolutely no way of knowing in advance what I will see. I have no control over the light, and light is crucial to photography. The animals which I see the most often and therefore photograph the most often, birds and insects, they make their own decisions about what they will do and when they will do it. And never tell me in advance. I can't be prepared. I have to be ready. I have to be observant. And it has happened multiple times that I have found things in my pictures that I did not know had happened when I took those pictures. So this experience of being in nature and connecting with nature through photography uh, is my own foundation for the theme that I'm taking up this morning, nature, beauty, and spirit. These words are also the provisional title for a book that I have been working on for about a year. My initial concept for that book was that it would be a collection of photographs, sort of set in a brief framework of text. But as I have worked on it, the text has been assuming a greater and greater importance. It's kind of a reflection of the fact that working on the book has in itself been sort of a means towards internal advancement. So I'm I have founded a good part of what I'll be saying this morning on work that has gone into the book. And in fact, I'm going to now share with you the opening words of chapter 1 of that book. Nature speaks to most of us in powerful ways. Who has not felt immersed in a brilliant sunrise or sunset, or drawn by the moving waters of the ocean, or stilled while walking among ancient trees? Birds and butterflies feel like jewels flitting among the trees and flowers. We plant flower gardens and we put flowers on our tables because they feel so beautiful and they bring light into our everyday worlds. Flowers are also used to bring beauty into the churches and temples of most religious traditions, and they are woven into many, many religious practices. So are fragrances, often provided by burning of incense. So is light itself. Oil lamps and candles are commonly lit in preparation for services and ceremonies and are part of many a ritual. The beauty of nature and the quest for spirit are related in many, many ways. Poets across cultures and ages have searched for words to capture our deep affinity with nature and the impact that nature makes on us. And here are several verses from the work of a contemporary Indian author and educator, Arti Chopra, taken from her poem called Beauty in Nature. There's a poem in every flower, a sonnet in every tree, a tale in every lifetime. It's just for you to see. There is a lyric in every brook as it rushes over rocks. There's an ode in every nuance as love's wonder unlocks. Just listen for the music that your ears cannot hear. Just strain yourself for the melody that's so far and yet so near. The wonder of the Creator, the magic of the divine, is there to feel for all of us, to soon be yours and mine. And here's the opening of a poem that, at least for me, illustrates the deepening of our appreciation of nature that science can make possible. In 2015, I opened a website that I called Nature's Depths. And on it, I published a series of primarily science-based essays illustrated with my own photographs. There were 65 essays in total over the years. I opened the very first essay with these words. 2 centuries ago, the poet William Blake wrote 4 of the most often quoted lines in English literature. The opening of his poem, Auguries of Innocence, it is a passage that echoes my own experience. To see a world in a grain of sand, and heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. To see a world in a grain of sand, to peer so deeply into the nature of any one thing that the riches of the universe begin to be revealed. That, to me, is the essence of science as a quest, not as a profession or a career, not as a niche in a complex society, but as a quest for understanding one's deepest nature. Do these words, both Blake's and mine, not echo the poem of Arti Chopra? To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, wrote Blake. There's a poem in every flower, a sonnet in every tree, wrote Arti Chopra, and a lyric in every brook. Just listen for the music that your ears cannot hear. These poets and many others extol the beauty and wisdom we can sense if we pay deep attention to the nature that surrounds us. When we peer in an open-hearted as well as an open-minded way into any one thing, the riches of the universe begin to be revealed. And what does it mean to peer? Listen to the words of Edward O. Wilson. He was a highly honored biology professor at Harvard who most often described himself as a naturalist. A naturalist is a student of nature primarily in its own setting rather than in a laboratory. These words come at the close of the first chapter of a path-breaking book that he wrote called Biophilia, the human bond with other species, where biophilia is a Latin term that basically means love of living things. They are his reflections, these words are his reflections on his own experiences during a day of biological exploration. This is what he said. Mundane events acquired the raiment of symbolism, and this is what I concluded from them: that the naturalist journey has only begun, and for all intents and purposes will go on forever. That it is possible to spend a lifetime in a Magellanic voyage around the trunk of a single tree. That as the exploration is pressed, it will engage more of the things close to the human heart and spirit. And this is a scientist speaking, a leading scientist. Do not his words, E.O. Wilson's words, resonate in a remarkable way with those of the poets? Is not spending a lifetime in a voyage around the trunk of a single tree like seeing the world in a grain of sand? Is not Wilson's vision that deeper and deeper exploration will engage more of the things close to the human heart and spirit, like hearing a poem in every flower, and a sonnet in every tree, and seeing heaven in a wildflower? Well, let me now leave the text of the book and share with you a teaching experience I had at the University of Washington that bears on this same point. I love teaching, and I did quite a bit that was beyond what my UW department required of me. And I did this extra teaching primarily through the honors program. This worked well because the program had no curriculum of its own. It wasn't a department, didn't have any faculty. It operated on courses contributed by faculty who simply wanted to teach them. The first such course for me was a science course for honors students who were not science majors. Science majors in honors took courses provided by science departments. But every student, no matter what their major, was required to take a minimum amount of entry-level science. So teaching some aspects of science to students who were working in fields like history or literature or economics or art in a way that would be meaningful to them was the purpose of the first course that I taught through honors. And I called it Brains, Consciousness, and Evolution. The last course I taught, as I was in the process of preparing for retirement in 2002, was close to our theme today. I called it Nature in Scripture. Not nature and scripture, nature in scripture. Because I wanted my courses to be meaningful to non-science students, I looked for ways to present the subject matter at a personal level. One of the steps I took with this goal in mind in Brains, Consciousness, and Evolution was to give the students, of whom there were 25 or 30, two active tasks. The course took place in the spring, so many flowers were in bloom. And the first assignment for each student was to wander around campus, find some flowers that they resonated with, sit by them, and write a poem that the flowers called forth within them. The second assignment, a bit later in the quarter, was more specific and rather scientific in its details. The campus was rich in rhododendrons. So each student was to find a rhododendron bush that was in flower and write a detailed description of its flowers. What color were they? How many petals did each flower have? What color were the pollen-producing structures, the stamens? How many of those stamens were there? What did the female parts, the stylus with its sticky stigma at the tip and the ovaries at the base, what did they look like? And then came the main part. Observe a small cluster of flowers, or even just a single flower, for an extended period, at least 15 to 20 minutes. Keep track of what insects arrive and how many of them. Observe and describe their behavior. How do they get to the sugar-laden nectar that they are looking for inside the flowers? How do they drink it? Does any pollen stick to their bodies? And if it does, where? And so forth. And at the end, write a detailed description of what you observed. At the end of the quarter, a group of students generally came to talk with me about just about the course. What they said this year about these two assignments was very striking, and I have never, ever forgotten it. They told me that they had been asked to write poems multiple times before, so that first assignment was okay, but it was somewhat routine. However, they had never in their lives looked at flowers or anything else in nature in such a detailed way. They were amazed at how much they saw and how it drew their attention. They loved that assignment. It was the highlight of the course for them. Isn't that quite a lesson? That really paying attention to the natural world, observing it carefully, is very different from going for a stroll and simply noticing how beautiful nature is. It is even different from valuing the feelings that nature's beauty calls forth. Close observation and the questions that close observation often calls forth can be revelatory about nature, and they can also be transformative for the watcher. Remember E.O. Wilson's words. As the exploration is pressed, it will engage more of the things close to the human heart and spirit. Well, let me now turn to the final phase of this morning's discourse. I have prepared a set of slides that I hope will provide worthwhile examples of nature, beauty, and spirit, and also the enrichment that inquiry of a scientific kind can contribute to one's inner experience. The rising sun? Yes? Okay. No, I'm going to tell you two stories, but I couldn't resist starting with this photograph of a sunrise on a misty morning a few weeks ago. I'm sure that this is a familiar view for you and one that calls forth an internal glow despite the familiarity. Well, looking at a cloudless sky a few hours before sunrise allows us to see the stars. And the darker and clearer the sky, the more stars we see, and the brighter they look to us. City lights always generate some background light, and that limits what we can see. So it's a truism that if you really want to experience a starry night, you should go to an area like the North Shore and turn your gaze to the heavens in the middle of the night. And a standard recommendation for photographers is to go out between 2 and 4 in the morning. Well, Despite the limitations imposed by city lights, I have gone out and photographed multiple times. So I went out and this is what my camera recorded. There are about 10 times as many stars in this picture as I was able to see with the naked eye. But now, look at that. Now, believe it or not, this is what manifested after I processed the very next picture that I took in my camera. And that picture was a duplicate of the previous one. It's just, I pressed the shutter a second time. Amazing, isn't it? It's astonishing what the camera had captured, even though I could not see it. It is also astonishing to be reminded that the sky is so rich in stars. We city dwellers, we tend to forget about that because we see it so very rarely. But those who grew up far from cities have vivid memories of scenes just like that. We have in front of us an image that is a reflection of the immense scale of the universe, a scale that astronomers have tried to determine and explain to us for centuries. The image does far more than capture a moment of great beauty in our earthly surroundings. It brings us into contact with the vastness of which our earth, the earth we live on, is a part. Well, let us turn now to flowers. And we started this morning with flower imagery. There is a poem in every flower, a sonnet in every tree, wrote Arti Chopra. To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, wrote William Blake. Rabindranath Tagore loved flowers. He planted them in his own garden and they formed vivid imagery throughout his writing. Listen to these lines. The first flower that blossomed on this earth was an invitation to an unborn song. God waits to win back his own flowers as gifts from man's hands. Love is when the soul starts to sing and the flowers of your life bloom on their own. Dark clouds become heaven's flowers when kissed by light. Let life be beautiful like summer flowers and death like autumn leaves. Now, flowers occur abundantly in wild nature. As you can see in this photograph of a flower meadow on the edges of Mount Rainier in the Cascade Mountains of Washington. My students in Brains, Consciousness, and Evolution looked so carefully at flowers on the UW campus, but they could have done exactly the same project, at least as well, in this flower meadow. We value the presence of flowers in our homes. This is a bouquet in the home of one of my cousins in Slovakia. And here is a crown of flowers born by our oldest granddaughter at her wedding a few years ago. And we humans, we're not the only ones who are drawn to flowers, as you can see in this picture. For whatever reason, this tree frog was drawn to a flower in our garden on Whidbey Island outside of Seattle, and she stayed there for quite some time. That's why I have so many pictures. Many organisms are drawn to flowers. In fact, From a biological point of view, the whole point of a plant making flowers is to draw animals to it. And why would it do that? As the students came to understand, to make the next generation of the flower making plant in the best possible way. This is a picture of the interior of a tulip, of the inside of a tulip flower, and it shows you the essence of the story. The three-branch structure in the very center is the top of the female part of the flower, called the stigma, which is sticky so that it can capture pollen. At its base and connected by a structure called a stylus are the several ovaries that contain the eggs. The 6 structures around the stigma and the stylus and the ovaries are the male component of the flower, the stamens with the pollen-making anthers at the tip. Pollen is functionally just like the sperm of animals. It makes its way to eggs so it can fertilize them. But as you can see, the eggs and the sperm are right by each other. The challenge is to make as sure as possible that the eggs do not get fertilized by the sperm of their own flower or any other flower on their own plant. That would be just like extreme inbreeding among us humans. And we know how damaging that can be. And there are also evolutionary arguments for why that would be a very bad process. The most common mechanism for avoiding inbreeding is to have the pollen mature before the eggs do. Right? So they're in the same place, but they're maturing at different times. So now that we know about baby making in flowers, let's see how the flowers help the pollen get together with appropriate eggs, eggs from different flowers of the same species. And here is where they rely on visiting animals, primarily insects. They draw cruising insects to them from a distance by the 2 properties that draw us humans as well. The visual characteristics of the flowers, the colors and the shapes of the petals and their arrangement, so on, the patterns that are on them. Those are the same petals that we call beautiful. And also their fragrance. Fragrance spreads widely. And fragrance, flower fragrance, is often very pleasing to us as well. And why would insects be on the lookout for flowers in the first place? Because they offer them valuable nutrition. The pollen is rich in protein, and the secretion the flowers produce, the nectar, is primarily rich in sugars that provide immediate energy. So, whoops. Here you see a fly perched directly on the anthers. And I don't remember what kind of flower this was. And the little white spots are the grains of pollen. So the dark purple are the anthers. They have made pollen on the inside, and there's some of it sticking to the outside. They're cracking open so the pollen can be released. And here you see a bumblebee drinking nectar from a milkweed flower. The light is making the drinking tube, the proboscis, glow, so it's easy to recognize it. It's what you see right in the middle of the picture, pointing slightly above 3 o'clock. And this picture also shows something that's crucial. See all the yellow that's packed on top of the bumblebee's head? It's a little bit out of focus. And also little yellow and sometimes white-looking dots that are scattered elsewhere on the body, especially on the legs. That is pollen. It is clinging to the surface of the bumblebee in a haphazard way. The bumblebee didn't put it there. Sometimes bumblebees do collect pollen. They have structures for storing it, but this is just attached casually. When this bumblebee lands on another milkweed flower, there is a chance that some of that pollen will rub off on that other flower's receptive female stigmas. And if that happens, there is a good chance that an egg will get fertilized. When it comes to milkweed, only a few of the flowers out of the many that form a head of milkweed flowers that many of you will be familiar with, only a few will get their eggs fertilized and make seeds. But those that do produce large numbers of seeds. So here you see on the lower right a pod, a milkweed pod, and it has many, many seeds. The ones on the lower right are still inside the pod. The ones on the upper left are dispersing, and you can see that every seed has a cluster of threads on it that will help the wind carry it to new locations. And here is one such seed. The lower right is the seed part that contains the embryo, and then you see the hairs that the breeze engages with and spreads the seeds. If at some point, oh, and let me point out one other thing. If you look in the lower right, you see some of these very fine threads, and they are holding the seed attached to the remains of a completely different flower. It has nothing to do with the milkweed seed. It just got stuck there, and then the breeze will yank it free, and it will land somewhere else. And if it lands on good soil, a new milkweed plant may come into existence. And the mother who made an abundance of flying seeds, she is now totally empty, and she is as beautiful as ever. So stars and flowers have provided us with the two stories that we have explored. People who seek to understand nature have looked carefully beneath the surface. They have discovered these stories, and they have told them to us. As we have heard, one such explorer and storyteller, E.O. Wilson, said that as an exploration is pressed, it engages more of the things that are close to the human heart and spirit. This has certainly been true for me, and I hope that the two stories that I've touched on have also come through to your hearts and have sort of nourished your engagement with the spirit. Let me close with two of the lines from Tagore. Dark clouds become heaven's flowers when kissed by light. And this is a Guru Purnima moon. Let life be beautiful like summer flowers. And death like autumn leaves.
You left us speechless, Johnny. Let us reflect on ourselves and also the nature around us. I think you reminded us to find the beauty in everything that is around us, within us, and come to understand, to connect them to. I think that's how beauty really is in the eyes of the beholder. And the beholder, as we understand it, is none different than Brahman as we see it. Sarvam Khalvidam Brahman. So when one is able to see that every segment of our society brings forth the same divinity in different format, and your mind, in your eyes, in your vision, your thinking, you see that the same Brahman exists in everything. Everything looks beautiful. And I think you, as a evolved individual, is able to see that beauty exists in each and every one of them. And the scientific mind of yourself was able to bring it together in a sequential fashion for an average mind of ours to understand it, grasp it, imbibe it, inculcate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. It was a superb lecture, and I loved it. You talked about E.O. Wilson, and let me share his impact, not only in biology, but in physics. The American Physical Society that takes care of, physics issues in America, it is very easy for them to define what is physics, but it is extremely difficult to define what is science in a few sentences.
Yeah.
So they decided that the best way to deal with this issue is to take few sentences from Wilson's book and use it as a definition of science. So in physics, we are using Wilson's definition of science. You talked about, asking your students to look at flowers. Galileo once said that, there is no teaching, only learning. Basically, you are allowing them to learn. That's what you are doing. You are not teaching them anything, but they are learning in that process. How much we are separated from nature. In physics, I do a similar assignment. I ask my students that, okay, anytime you come out, just look at the sky, and if you see the moon, just see what you see there in the moon. Draw it. And the class started laughing that, oh, moon comes out only at night. So why should we look at the moon in daytime? And I said, just try it. And they were so surprised that you can see the moon in daytime also. And by just looking at the simple observation, you can learn about the phases of the moon and that we are seeing only one side of the moon. We are not seeing both sides. So these simple observations, if you start observing the nature, it can be a very powerful tool. My question to you is, you shared pictures in the end. How are you going to write that explanation that you provided us in the book? Because it is not easy. The first part of your lecture was easy, to write it in a book, but the last part was very difficult to write.
You are very right, and I am putting that off until the end.
Okay.
It's been enough of a challenge to write the opening. As you well know, in the opening, you prepare the reader for what's coming, and you need to do it in a way that is engaging, and that is also a challenge.
Mm.
Yeah.
So basically what you are saying is your first chapter is not done as yet.
It will not be done until the book is published.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, with respect to the book, I have an arrangement with the publisher that sometime very soon, in the next week or 10 days, I will give her the provisional text for the opening half dozen or so chapters and pictures that are candidate pictures to go with those chapters. And she will start on the book design, because the way the text and the pictures are shown to the reader on the pages of the book is of huge importance in how they come across, both the pictures and the text. And she's a very good designer, so it just makes sense for her to experiment at the beginning and see what the possibilities are. I'm curious, the story about the flowers and the pollen and the eggs and the seeds and getting fertilized and all those things, was that a familiar story to everybody, or were there some new components to it that either you didn't know or you hadn't thought about since you were in school? Or I'm just wondering.
There was one component where I saw both the female and male parts within the same flower. I thought they were male flowers separate and female flowers separate, and the bees have to take the pollen from there and then do it. So
That is true for some plants. They have separate male and female flowers.
Yeah.
But the more common arrangement is to have them both within one flower.
oh,
More common by far, like maybe, I don't know, 90% or something like that. Yeah. So this problem of not self-fertilizing is a very widespread issue for flowering plants. And flowering plants have done magnificently well on the earth. So they have evolved mechanisms to prevent self-fertilization. And the separation of maturation times is the most common one of those mechanisms, but there are some others as well.
Yeah, thank you, Johnny. This is Dan. I'm a biologist too, but I don't think my biology teacher taught me about about the separation of pollination and delay. That was new to me, and it was great to hear, and it made a lot of sense.
And you've grown a ton of flowers too, right?
Yes, yes, we have. Yeah. Yeah, we have a little natural area about less than a block away from where we live, and we restored it, a bunch of us in the neighborhood, and it's just this place left because you can't build on it. It's got a little creek running through it. It's got hemlock and grand fir and all these trees and deciduous trees, and it's just like you just have to. I just have to walk 100 yards and I'm in the forest, and it's just the greatest feeling.
Yeah. And what you said also incidentally makes a related point that not all plants have flowers,
Yeah.
but they reproduce sexually nevertheless. Right.
Yep.
And those who are allergic to pollen in the springtime are being affected by the millions and millions of pollen grains that are being released by trees that don't have flowers and don't have pollinating insects. They just release their pollen into the air, and by chance it lands on the female part of some other tree and makes a seed and a new tree. So nature has multiple ways.
Multiple strategies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. Yeah. Yeah.
but Johnny, there is a opposite effect of nature as well. Nature is also, the floods and the typhoons and all that, right? Nature is not just beauty, and the life of the plant or, everyone, I mean, they're just trying to survive the nature also. So there is a different aspect of it. So we have all evolved a way to, survive the nature.
That, of course, yes. That's a very important point. Even something like a drought, if the rain doesn't fall when it usually does, then many plants may die and animals may die if they don't have water to drink. So yes, nature is a highly complex system filled with interacting components. And the relationship of flowers to insects is just one example among probably millions of how components of nature interact, and it is essential for the continuation of the nature that we know for those interactions to be successful. How they're done may change, that's evolution, but having the interactions be successful is part of life. Yeah, exactly.